So we're going to continue the top portion of our brick, and we're going to add the mid-tone up here and some of this detail. So we're going to start by just kind of figuring out where these dark spots are going to start. So I'm going to start with a line to define the edge, and then I'm going to start just using my scribbling technique and scribble in the detail. So I'm looking at my photo reference. Now I'm also using those rough pencil lines I put in to guide where everything's going to be. Now I can go back over where I've already worked, darken up those areas, and just keep building up value and adding this texture. So for now, I'm not doing too much of the stippling. That's the technique where you're just putting in dots. Right now, I'm scribbling in to build up that dark value. And if you do use lighter pressure with the pen, it will draw lighter. So I'm just putting in this detail here, starting light and building darker. So my lines are barely visible because I'm putting very little pressure on my pen. It's the same thing we do with the pencil, you can also do with ink. So now the areas I need to darken up more, I'm going to go ahead and start doing some hatching. And then if I need to darken it up a little bit more, I can go back and cross hatch. But for now, I'm just making sure that this dark area is defined a little bit better. That way I can darken up some of my midtones around it. And then there's a crack around the brick and the mortar. I'm just going to define that line a little bit better and thicken it up. And now I'm just going through and I'm adding a little more hatching around my darkest areas because I need this whole mid-tone to be just a little bit darker. You can see that this is a lot darker than it currently is on my drawing, so I'm just going to hatch to darken it up on the paper. So this whole area I think just needs to be darkened up. You can look at your photo reference, and I think just this whole area down here needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go over this area with hatching and darken it up. So like I've said before, it's easier to make things darker. It's impossible to make them lighter with a pen. So now that I have kind of the mid-tone of my upper area done, I can go in and darken up the base. So now with the highlight portion of this stone, I'm going to do scribbling, but I'm not going to do nearly as much as the other sides. So I still want to create this texture, but I don't want to darken the value up. So I'm going to find the darkest areas, and I'm going to scribble in that detail and start defining the shadows. And I'm keeping the areas of scribbling as far away from each other as I can because I need a lot of white space to show that this is a highlighted area. So I'm trying to leave as much space between these areas of scribbling. So I'm going to bring in my photo reference. I'm going to start to find these darker areas, little cracks and lines, and start defining those a little bit more. So now I'm going to start to stipple, and that's where we just put the dots with the end of our pen in. This builds up value and it also builds up texture. It builds up value in a very slow way, so I can go in and add a lot of texture with stippling and not build the value up nearly as much as we do when we scribble. So now I'm going across the top and I'm defining the crack between the grout and the brick. And again, I'm just going through and I'm doing more stippling, building up more value, finding any spots that might need more scribbles and adding those. This isn't a quick process. It shouldn't be rushed. The more time you take, the better the final product will look. So I'm going to bring in my photo reference, and so there's just a couple spots I think that we can add just some stippling, darken up some areas. I like the way my highlight side looks. I think that my core shadow side just needs to be darker. So I can go in and I can cross hatch and darken that up and still be able to see the texture I've put in. So as I darken up my core shadow side, which is the bottom side, I can see that my mid-tone side needs to be a little darker. So always look at your photo reference, figure out what needs to have a little bit of hatching added to it to darken it up. So my mid-tone area is looking good. I think my core shadow side probably can be darkened up a little bit more. So I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to cross hatch over some of these highlights that are a little too bright for what our photo reference looks like. So I'm just going to darken that up a little bit, take a look, decide whether or not it needs a little more value, and go in and make some changes. So I think we can darken this area up a little bit more. And so my hatching is just really close together. The further apart it is, the more you'll kind of lose that detail. So make sure you use that close hatching to darken that up. So I think this can even be darkened up more. I might add a little bit to it. This can be a little darker. I'm not going to do a ton to it now. This is stuff, now that kind of this is set up and looking pretty close to what it's going to look like, the final product, I can just do tiny little details here, and then I can come back once everything around it's done and just see what needs to be darker, where I need to add a little more detail, and come back and just clean it up.